This might be a little hard to believe, but it's been 30 years since the first Toy Story was released. It was followed 4 years later by Toy Story 2, and now in 2026 we have Toy Story 5. My wife and I were a little bit late going to see this movie as I was away in London at the art conference, but if you're looking for something to do with your small people on the last weekend of the school holidays and you're considering Toy Story 5, you might be interested to know just how family friendly it is, or perhaps isn't. I'll give you the messaging and the content that I thought was fantastic, but also a few concerning elements so you can make an informed decision before watching this film with your children or grandchildren in your life. I'll start with the positives. Toy Story 5 shifts away from what we've seen in the past, from toys saving other toys to toys trying to save childhood. And that is because of this pandemic of screens that have zombie-like children glued to them. Very early on in the film, Jessie, who's really the main toy in this film, she's shown all the kids in the neighborhood, and adults for that matter, completely glued to their screens. They're not interacting with their friends or their family. This is obviously a very real problem. And this is facing our youngest generation of kids. It's really a bit of a crisis, and Toy Story captures this very well. Even to the point where it may cause kids to reflect on the effect that screen time is having on them. Not that I'm naive enough to think that kids will change their habits after watching Toy Story, but it might give you an opportunity to have some interesting and very important conversations with your kids. And those conversations are important to have because these are some of the trends that we are seeing with the introduction of smartphones and tablets amongst our youngest generation.
In 2010, smartphones became mainstream and affordable. Apps and social media exploded. So now we can track the impact. Psychological distress in our teenagers has skyrocketed. And look at the dates. It's all after the 2010 smartphone revolution. Mental illness through the roof. Hospitalizations for mental health, girls up 81%. Self-harm, huge increases for kids aged 10 to 12. The percentage of children sleeping less than 7 hours a night, look at that, all since 2010. The only graph that goes down, the time kids spend with their friends face to face.
And now we're starting to learn what those screens are doing to even younger brains. New studies are showing that they are changing the very makeup of a child's brain itself. MRI scans of a child's brain from age 3 to 5 showed that interactive screen time for children of that age resulted in a loss of white matter in that child's brain. So in simple terms, screen use in young children literally results in brain damage. Here's what white matter does in a child's brain.
Well, in the simplest terms, we could actually refer to as some measure of brain impairment or brain damage.
Professor Mike Nagel from the University of the Sunshine Coast has spent a career studying child brain development.
So white matter in the brain is a material called myelin. So what myelin does is it wraps around the axons of neurons and acts like an insulator, a conductor, not too dissimilar to the plastic coating of a wire. So if we're seeing deficits in myelin production early in life, we're probably seeing deficits in neural connectivity.
The study shows the more screen time a child is exposed to, the greater the loss of white matter.
It's very sobering, but that's the reality of what screen time is doing to a child's brain. But back to Toy Story. So the toys are realizing that their child Bonnie is struggling to connect with other kids. Not because there's anything wrong with her, but because those kids are all connecting via screens. So against their better judgment, Bonnie's parents get her a screen called LilyPad, or Lily for short. The effect this LilyPad has on Bonnie is quite provoking to watch because it is very accurate. If you've seen a young person addicted to a screen, this is going to hit hard. These screens start to dictate their life and they become a whole different little human. Jessie and the gang realize this and set out to do whatever they can to help Bonnie. And that to me is what makes this film worthwhile. Those messages are strong and the solutions that are given along the way are also very true. There was a moment that stuck out to me when Jessie was playing on an electronic game to pass the time, and she absolutely loved it. She was having a great time. But once that was over, she was quick to explain to the toys that were present that what she was doing wasn't playing, it was just a game. And I think that is a very powerful observation. Play is something that requires imagination. Imagination isn't something kids only need to keep themselves entertained until they grow up and start doing productive things. And now they don't seem to need imagination at all because of the screen that does all of that for them. But the imagination that play requires is very important, and that's what toys are for. They're a prop for a child's imagination to run wild, to create worlds and stories. It's crucial for creative elements of a child's brain and personality. That's why reading is also very important for kids, even fiction. It's so important because their minds naturally need to create the worlds that they're reading about. It engages their mind in a way that nothing else can. And that is what Jessie the Cowgirl was getting at. Gaming on an electronic device and playing use your imagination are two very different things. If a child doesn't use their imagination when they're young, for play or reading or anything like that, and instead just spoon-fed their entertainment on a screen, I'm convinced that not only will their brain not fully develop, but they will also not be the creative adults that they could be when they grow up. And Bonnie's toys seem to know this, and they are fixated on having their kid Bonnie connect with a real person and friend so that they can play and use their imaginations together. And so that is the main plot and message of this film, and I think that was exceptional. A surprisingly potent and culturally relevant message for families. But it did have some issues as well. So now we'll get on to the more negative elements of the film. My main issue with this film from a story, or more importantly moral point of view, is what I would call the feminization of the male characters. Jessie the Sheriff takes over in this film as the main character, and that of course is completely fine. The story centered around her is actually a very good one. My frustration is that in the process of making the main character a female, they've had to also make the other male heroes of the previous films, the ones that everybody has loved for 30 plus years, well, they've made them weak, pathetic, and the butt of a lot of the jokes. Woody's gotten fat, he's balding, which is kind of funny except for they spent most of the film calling him old, as he was rather useless. Jessie did call him for advice at the start of the film, while he was busy rescuing a toy from a tree, but that was about as good as it got for Woody. At one point, he's literally hanging upside down getting munched on by a pig while everyone is calling him old. He also very clearly gets bossed around by his girlfriend, Bo Peep. At the end of the film, she yells at Woody to move over because she's driving. But really, it was Buzz that turned out to be a complete pansy in this film. He was smitten by Jessie, and the Space Ranger couldn't bring himself to ask Jessie to marry him. Until he eventually does get the chance to ask Jessie, and he can't quite get the words out, so Jessie leans over and kisses him, so he doesn't need to. And then in an attempt to somehow make a heterosexual kiss gay, Buzz lifts up one leg like he's a girl posting for an Instagram pic. And it didn't end there because they do go on to get married. Now, granted, they get married through the process of Bonnie playing with them. So this wedding is all part of her play. And that's how the toys get married. So you could be very charitable and say this is all part of Bonnie's silly childhood imagination. But along with everything else they did to Buzz and Woody, it seems very purposeful and not just a bit of tongue-in-cheek fun. And that is that Buzz is the one that walks down the aisle, not Jessie. He's wearing a quilt, so not quite a dress, but it's a nod. And then here's the one dipped and kissed by Jessie at the end. So you could say, is Disney making progress? I didn't spot anything gay or trans or pride related. You could say that Bonnie is wearing rainbow socks, but as far as I could tell, those are just rainbow socks, not pride socks. So no LGBTQ, thankfully, in this film. And there are even 2 heterosexual toy weddings. But they did make Buzz as feminine as they possibly could while still liking girls. And Woody, the former hero of the series, not only fell into the background but was mocked for a good chunk of the film and bossed around by Bo Peep. And so that's my frustration with the film. It's the not so subtle message to young kids that girls can move into a place of leadership, sure, but it needs to be at the expense of the guys around her. Female leadership means that men suddenly become useless, a bit pathetic, and ready to be bossed around, and as feminine as possible while still actually liking girls. I'll take a wild stab in the dark at the kind of person who wrote those elements into the film. Another couple of things that I think parents should know is there is a fair amount of subtle humor aimed at adults, which is probably why the movie was actually quite enjoyable. There is some questionable language, however. There is a character who refers to himself as a name that sounds very much like the S word, which is definitely the joke that they were going for within the film. I laughed, but that doesn't mean that you want your kids to be entertained by that though. And there's another situation using the same toilet humor character. He's cut off just in time, but he says, "I'll wipe your," and at one point he says, "Flush me," but that'll probably go way over the kids' heads. Otherwise, the curse words consist of Golly G, cheese and crackers, and other such things. And so in summary, how would I rate this film? Well, for its story and humor and overall messaging and of course the nostalgia, and I was on a date night with my wife at the time, so I was in a very good mood, but I would give it 4 out of 5 Pavlovas. But in terms of family friendliness, I'm introducing the Family First Watchdog alert system. Green is for when the watchdog is relaxed, orange he is alert and he's got some concerns, and red he is in full opposition. He knows this content is a danger to his family. And so with some of the language, the toilet humor, and the feminization of the male characters, Toy Story causes the family watchdog to be on alert. Knowing now what the concerns are, you can make an informed decision if Toy Story is worth the watch for you and your family. If you do decide those themes are worth navigating, I think you'll find some powerful messaging about the dangers of tech, the importance of friendship, and the necessity of a child's imagination.